Imagine sitting in a cold, sterile room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of antiseptic in the air, and the man you gave everything to, sliding a stack of papers across the table toward you. Not flowers, not an apology. Divorce papers. Sarah Miller sat in that hospital chair, her hospital gown still on, her baby bump 8 months full of life. And she looked at her husband of 4 years, Daniel Hartley, and she waited for him to say it was a joke. He didn't. He leaned back in his chair, straightened his tie, and said, without blinking, "Sign it. Sarah, don't make this harder than it needs to be." She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had cooked his meals, packed his lunches, rubbed his back when he came home stressed. The same hands now trembling over the signature line of a document that would erase her from his life. "Daniel," she whispered, "I'm 8 months pregnant." He checked his watch. "I know," he said flatly, "which is why I need this done before things get complicated." He thought he was closing a chapter. He thought he was walking away clean. He thought the woman in that hospital bed, exhausted, heartbroken, carrying his child, had no power left in this world. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea who her father was. Stay till the end, because the moment everything changed, it was worth every second of the wait. To understand how we got to that cold hospital room, you have to understand who Sarah was. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She was the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order, who sent birthday cards early, who always asked "How are you?" and actually waited for the answer. She had grown up simply, a small apartment, a hard-working mother, a father who left when she was 12. Not because he didn't love her, but that part comes later. She met Daniel at 26. He was charming in that particular way that dangerous men often are. Confident handshakes, easy smile, always the most interesting person in the room. He made her feel chosen. And for a woman who had spent years feeling quietly overlooked, being chosen felt like everything. They married fast, maybe too fast. But love has a way of making urgency feel like certainty. For 2 years it was good, or at least it looked good. Then the company started growing. Daniel's tech firm, Hartley Solutions, landed a major contract. And suddenly there was more money, more travel, more late nights. And with all of that came Vanessa. Sarah found out the way so many women do. A notification on a shared tablet. A message that wasn't meant for her eyes. Words that made her stomach drop before her brain even processed what she was reading. She confronted him quietly. The way she did everything, calmly, with shaking hands and steady words. Daniel didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. "You've changed, Sarah," he said. "You're not the person I married. You're just here, existing." She was 4 months pregnant at the time. She told herself she would fight for the family. She went to counseling alone. She cooked his favorite meals. She swallowed her pain like medicine. Bitter, necessary, survivable. But Daniel had already made his decision. He just hadn't told her yet. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Sarah had been driving home from a prenatal appointment when another car ran a red light and clipped the side of her vehicle. She wasn't badly hurt. The doctors said she and the baby were stable. But the stress, the shock, and the weeks of emotional devastation had worn her body thin. She called Daniel from the hospital. He didn't pick up the first time, or the second. When he finally arrived, 2 hours later, he didn't rush to her bedside. He stood in the doorway, phone in hand, and looked at her the way you look at a problem you're tired of solving. "Are you okay?" he asked. "We're okay," she said, meaning herself and the baby. Something crossed his face. Not relief, not love. Something that looked almost like irritation. That was the night he called his lawyer. 3 days later, still in the hospital for observation, Sarah was handed the papers. And that is where our story truly begins, not ends. Because what Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the moment those papers landed in Sarah's lap, a phone buzzed in a penthouse office 42 floors above the city. A quiet man looked at his screen, read the notification, set down his coffee, and said very calmly to the assistant beside him, "It's time." His name was Robert Calloway. If you passed him on the street, You might notice him, silver hair, calm eyes, the kind of stillness that comes from a man who has nothing left to prove. He dressed simply. He drove himself. He ate lunch alone at the same diner every Thursday. He did not look like a trillionaire. That was entirely intentional. Robert had built his fortune in silence over 30 years. Real estate, energy, private equity, technology infrastructure. His name appeared nowhere on Forbes lists. His companies were layered through holding corporations and silent partnerships. He preferred it that way. He had one vulnerability in this world: his daughter. When Sarah was 12, Robert had made the most painful decision of his life. His enemies, and a man that powerful collects enemies the way others collect debts, had begun to circle closer to his family. There had been threats, subtle ones at first, then less subtle. His wife, Sarah's mother, had agreed. The safest thing for Sarah was distance. For her to grow up believing her father was simply gone, an ordinary man who had walked away. He watched her from a distance for 14 years. Her graduation, her wedding, which he attended anonymously, 2 rows back in a plain suit and dark glasses. He had vetted Daniel Hartley himself before the engagement. At the time, the man had checked out. People change. Robert had been monitoring Hartley Solutions for 18 months, ever since his intelligence team flagged unusual financial activity in the company's accounts, and when Sarah's accident triggered every alert on his private security network. He stepped out of the shadows. What Daniel didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Robert Calloway had been quietly acquiring shares in Hartley Solutions for the better part of a year. Not enough to trigger disclosure requirements. Purchased through a web of shell companies and brokerage, accounts that no forensic accountant would unravel easily. Patient, methodical, invisible. By the time Daniel filed those divorce papers, Robert owned 31% of Hartley Solutions. The morning of the board meeting, Daniel arrived at the office feeling like a man who had finally cleaned house. Sarah had signed the papers 2 days earlier, quietly, without a scene, her eyes dry in a way that should have worried him. Vanessa had already picked out furniture for the new apartment. Life, Daniel told himself, was finally going his way. He walked into the boardroom on the 14th floor, nodded at his investors, settled into his chair at the head of the table. That was when the door opened. Robert Calloway walked in. He was followed by 2 attorneys, an auditor and a representative from the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Regulatory Authority. Daniel frowned. "Who are you?" "This is a private meeting." Robert sat down, folded his hands on the table, and looked at Daniel the way a man looks at something small and slightly tiresome. "My name is Robert Calloway," he said. "I own 31% of this company, which, as of this morning, makes me your largest single shareholder." The room went very quiet. What happened next took 47 minutes. The auditor opened a file. Inside were 18 months of financial records, flagged transactions, falsified contracts, money quietly siphoned from company, accounts into a private fund registered under a name no one in that room recognized. Daniel's name, $260,000, over 11 months, hidden in plain sight. That's not... "It is," Robert said simply. "We have the wire transfers. We have the correspondence. We have the offshore account documentation." One of the board members pushed back from the table, then another. Like dominoes, slowly, one by one, Daniel stood up. His chair scraped the floor. "You can't do this." "Your employment contract," Robert said, sliding a copy across the table, "includes a standard ethics clause. Financial misconduct constitutes immediate grounds for termination. The vote has already been conducted, remotely, this morning." He placed a second document in front of Daniel. "You've been removed as CEO, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your assets connected to the company, including stock options, severance eligibility, and company vehicle, are frozen pending investigation." Daniel looked around the room, at faces that wouldn't meet his eyes, at men who had shaken his hand 100 times, now looking carefully at their phones, their folders, anywhere but at him. "Why?" he said, and for the first time his voice cracked. "Why are you doing this?" Robert stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Daniel Hartley, this man who had handed his pregnant daughter divorce papers in a hospital room, and he said quietly, with the patience of a man who had waited a very long time, "Because she deserved better. She always did." He walked out. Vanessa left Daniel the same week she found out his accounts were frozen. No assets, no company, no future, just legal fees, investigators, and a reputation in ruins. He called Sarah 4 times. She didn't answer. On the 5th call, she picked up. She listened to him for 30 seconds. The apologies, the excuses, the desperation, and then she said, very gently, "Goodbye, Daniel," and she hung up. The first time Sarah met her father, truly met him as an adult, as the woman she had become, it was in a quiet room with afternoon light coming through tall windows. He had brought flowers, nothing expensive, just simple white tulips, the kind her mother used to keep in a blue vase by the kitchen window. She looked at him for a long moment. "You were always there," she said. It wasn't a question. "Always," he said. She exhaled, something she had been holding for a long time. She didn't forgive him instantly. Healing doesn't work that way, and real stories don't offer easy resolutions. But she let him sit beside her. She let him put his hand over hers. She let herself, for the first time in years, feel like someone's most important person in the world. 3 months later, Sarah gave birth to a girl. She named her Elise. Elise had her mother's calm eyes and her grandfather's stillness, that particular quality of a person who carries deep water beneath a quiet surface. Sarah built something of her own in the years that followed, a foundation. Non-profit work supporting women in crisis, women who had been left, women who had been told they were nothing, that they were just here existing. Her father funded it, but it was hers. And Daniel? Daniel spent 2 years in legal proceedings. He settled. He started over in a smaller city, a smaller life, a smaller version of everything he thought he deserved. Sometimes karma doesn't come in like a hurricane. Sometimes it comes in like a quiet man in a plain suit walking through a boardroom door. Here is what this story leaves us with. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Never confuse a person's softness with a lack of strength. The woman who signs quietly, who leaves without screaming, who cries alone and keeps moving, she's not broken. She is building. And sometimes, behind her quiet, something ancient and patient and powerful has already begun to move. Karma doesn't rush, but it never forgets. If this story moved you, if Sarah's strength reminded you of someone you know or someone you are, hit that like button. Subscribe to Soul of Kindness, because every week we bring you stories that remind you goodness is never wasted and strength always finds its way home. And tell me in the comments, what would you have said to Daniel in that boardroom? I read every single one.